Before we go into the discussion, the panel discussion on this, I would like to just note that there can be so many definitions of secularism. You can have very, very postmodern definition of secularism, which is to say no definition of secularism. But I actually picked up something from a stall here, which just says it as it is. Secularism is a principle that involves two basic propositions. The first is the strict separation of the state from religious institutions. And the second is that people of different religions and beliefs are equal before the law. That's it. That's what we are referring to here today. Now, in the morning, Bonna Ahmed actually touched upon this. She mentioned the history of colonialism. And she also mentioned that while Europe was going through this process of secularization in colonized world, in the third world, we had religions-based politics introduced by the colonialists. So whenever we are having this discussion, we need to remember this, that religion-based politics, religion-based state in a post-Westphalian world is actually a gift of colonialism. And if we are to fight colonialism, then we must also fight religion-based states and religion-based politics. Now, I personally, and my authority on this is that I do have a degree on human rights, that's it. I personally don't think that we should be identifying secularism as a right per se, and we can have a debate about that. I see secularism more as a framework of delivery of human rights, like democracy. And very quickly, I'd just like to mention that, we can have a very, very secular system where human rights abuses go on very wantonly. Case in point is China, where you have a separation between the church or the state or no church. But then again, you have persecution of Uyghur Muslims, for example. And first I'd like to start with the international system of human rights, and how the international system of human rights, what we refer to as the system that comes from the International Bill of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the ICCPR and other conventions. How do you make sure that how do you say what is the role of secularism in protecting the rights mentioned? And my question is to Karima. How do you make sure that secularism is used as a mechanism, as a framework to deliver the rights?
So thank you very much for the question, and I also would like to thank Mariam Namazi and the organizers for giving us this important space. So I think it's important to think about what exactly is guaranteed by international human rights norms in the area of what is called freedom of religion or belief nowadays, or FORB, because everything has to have an acronym. So if you look at Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, we find very clearly that it is guaranteed the right to be a religious believer, the right not to be a religious believer, and indeed the right to change belief. And it also guarantees the right to express belief, but this part of the right is subject to certain necessary limitations when those are necessary, including to protect the rights of others. The ICCPR, as we call it, the covenant, also guarantees that there is to be no coercion in religion, and I think it's critical to consider that as well. So, you know, what does this tell us overall about the view in international law of what should be the ideal relationship between religion and the state to guarantee human rights? There's a very big debate about that. I can say you can look, for example, at the book written by a scholar named Jérôme Temperman, arguing that there is an emerging right to what he calls religiously neutral government. I looked at what some of the UN mechanisms have said about this, and it was interesting to note, I looked at this with a student, that a lot of what the UN human rights mechanisms have said about secularism has been negative in the sense of how secularism, if not carried out in the proper way, could itself violate human rights. But very little attention, unfortunately, paid to the positive aspects of secularism vis-a-vis human rights. And I've been stunned at some of the statements that have come out. For example, Ken Roth, a few years ago, some of you may remember this, the director of Human Rights Watch, an organization which has done some very important work, including defending people who are victims of abuses carried out in the name of religion. But in 2011, in response to some criticisms of the Human Rights Watch World Report of that year by women of Muslim heritage, things that were said in that report about Islamism in particular, Ken Roth chose to write that there is no right to separation of religion and state, which I think is a remarkable assertion, especially if you look at the context of what was happening in 2011. So I actually think, going along the lines of Jérôme Temperman and perhaps going beyond that, we really have to claim the importance of secularism, as Tasneem said, as a tool, as a framework for guaranteeing a range of human rights. These include the right to freedom of religion or belief, including the right not to believe and to change belief, but also other rights, including the freedom of expression, the right to be free from violence against women and discrimination against women, and the area that I work on as the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, because there is so much of an overlap between culture and cultural expression and freedom of religion. So in my report to the Human Rights Council in March, which is about fundamentalism, extremism, and cultural rights, I very specifically recommended to states that they need to provide for and protect the separation of religion and state and guarantee religious freedom, including the right to believe, not to believe, and to change one's belief. And in the follow-up report that I'm doing for the General Assembly in October, there is a whole paragraph about secularism in the text, explaining my understanding of the term, explaining very clearly, using a quote from Gita Sahgal, who is here, that this is not about the absence of religion, it's not an anti-religion stance, but it is about a state structure that defends freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief, where there is no state religion, where law is not derived from God, and where religious actors cannot impose their will on public policy. And I know that this is going to get a great deal of pushback, so I look forward to finding ways to work with all of you to push this report through the UN system and get support for it, because I really think that the struggle for secularism is sort of a key human rights goal in the current moment.
So, one of the questions we often get is, what can we do? Like, what can you do to support? I mean, this is a concrete way of supporting. I mean, create pressure through lobby groups on your national government so that they can sort of enable the excellent work Karima is doing in her capacity as a rapporteur. I'd like to move to the European Parliament. We have a MEP amongst us, and we talked about United Nations, and I am very interested to know about your work inside the Parliament and at the EU level.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Mariam Namazi, along with the Dutch professor Paul Clitter, you remember Mariam, was our first guest in Euromind. For those of you who are not all that familiar with Euromind, we organize lectures, just one or? Lectures and publications with a commitment to freedom of thought, religion and speech, support for science-based policies, and the integration of all Europeans within a common political space. I am, as you said, a member of the Parliament. I am in ALDE, that is the liberal group. I'm a free thinker and a liberal. Individuals who hold secular belief and who place their faith in science and tolerance remain our natural allies. In their name, I have frequently addressed parliamentary questions regarding human rights issues to the European Commission and to the High Representative Federica Mogherini. Okay. The most recent include the case of the German satirist Jan Böhmermann, the disappearance of liberal activists in Pakistan, the case of Ibrahim Sharif in Bahrain, extremist homophobic preachers in Europe, and the problem of blasphemy laws. I have also voiced concern with regard to the situation of non-believers in post-coup Turkey and in Pakistan. I have directly expressed my concern at the attempt made by the Pakistan authorities to force Twitter and Facebook to disclose information about the users. This information was to be used in order to identify individuals suspected for blasphemy. These are universal values, as has said before Pragma Podel, but are specifically European values, especially now that we are building Europe. And they should be the values we uphold. Freedom does not simply mean multiculturalism. Above all, when the defense of multiculturalism supposes that we become indifferent to the characteristically human search for truth and happiness. I retain the hope that the European project will come to embody the universal principles that form the backbone of an open society. I must say now that I'm very sad for Brexit because of Brexit, and I hope that it could be reversed. This morning, our friend Anthony Grayling had said me that it could be possible. And he's a very wise man, and I believe him. I hope that could be reversed in the future because it's very, very sad that we are separated. Thank you very much.
If we have individuals in the audience who would like to later also comment on this, I'm personally very interested to know about what Brexit means for a secular Europe and secular UK. I'll now move to Michael. I understand you have been engaged in lobbying with United Nations, with Council of Europe, with the OSSE, the organization. So how do you see this? How do you, what are your comments on lobbying for secularism at these institutions?
Well, first of all, we have a policy in Atheist Ireland that when we are promoting atheism and reason, we use the language of philosophy and science. But when we are promoting secularism, we use the language of human rights. And when doing that, we respect the right to freedom of religion as well as the right to freedom from religion, but we use very fundamental principles: the right to freedom of religion or belief, the right to freedom from discrimination, the right to equality before the law. We try to educate the public first of all, and also our politicians, that these are very fundamental rights. And also we try to highlight with our governments that once they sign up to the various United Nations or Council of Europe treaties, that they are subjecting themselves to an oversight on their human rights obligations that they have to adhere to. And so the main bodies that we engage with are the United Nations, where there's a big distinction to be made in the United Nations between the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is essentially a political body where the states are policing each other, which can be quite compromised and which ends up with things like Saudi Arabia chairing subcommittees of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And on the other hand, the human rights committees, which are the bodies that oversee the obligations of the states under each of the treaties. And those committees are made up of independent human rights experts, and they're not engaged in these political tradings that you get at the council level. They are just examining each country once every few years under each of the treaties to say, here's article such and such of the treaty, here's your behaviour under this, can you explain to us how that behaviour is compatible with your obligations under the treaty? And civil society bodies such as Atheist Ireland are able to both make submissions to those bodies and also go to the meetings as they're happening, brief the Human Rights Committee before they question the state delegation, and then as the session is happening, if the state, as is quite frequent, gives misleading answers, we can, in real time, as the sessions are going on, let the committee members know that that's misleading. Obviously, we have to give them supporting evidence. They're not going to question them on the basis of somebody saying something, but if we give them, here's an example, this is what the law actually says, this is how it's incompatible with this article of the treaty, they will incorporate that into their questioning so we can have a direct involvement there. Another body that's very important to us is the OSCE, which is the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, they have, as part of their overall scheme of things, that they have a strand that deals with human rights. They have in Warsaw every year one of the biggest human rights sessions in Europe that goes on for 2 weeks. We go over for the sessions on freedom of religion and belief and the sessions on freedom of expression. And again, in those places, we can highlight before delegations from other states information about the discrepancies between what the states are saying they're doing and what they're actually doing on the ground. Another thing that the OSCE did that is very useful is they have put together a document called the Toledo Guiding Principles on teaching about religions and beliefs in a pluralist society. And that's a document that we use as a go-to in our lobbying in Ireland with the Department of Education, because it provides an objective set of criteria for how a curriculum should be delivered objectively, critically and pluralistically when teaching about religion. And it takes it out of the realms of us just arguing this is what we want and being able to say this is what an independent body of human rights experts, including members of religions, have come up with as a fair way of dealing with the complexities of these situations. Now, the one thing I'll close to bear in mind about this, it's not a magic bullet. They can't enforce what they're recommending, but they do provide a lot of both moral pressure and political weapons that we can then use in our respective countries when lobbying our politicians. Thank you.
So these reporting mechanisms, which Michael talked about, can also be very crucial. I know, for example, if you want to force the government of Bangladesh to comment on a specific case, the United Nations different rapporteurs can be really useful in doing that. We were talking about this before, and you also mentioned that you also work with Ahmadi Muslims, because this is one thing I want to focus a little bit on, because secularism is not only an issue for the secular or the atheists or the humanists. it is also a very crucial burning question for the religious also. Case in point, the Ahmadis, especially in Pakistan, which is a religious state and which is a Muslim state, where a specific group of people are barred from saying the Shahada or saying their prayers or engaging in Islamic rituals. Can you very briefly tell us a little bit about your work with the Ahmadis and other religious groups?
Yes, we work, as I said, I'll preface this by saying that when we are promoting atheism and reason, we are very strong about that, and we do not compromise our belief that atheism is a more reliable worldview than religious or faith-based worldviews. But concurrent with that, when working on secularism, we are happy to work with religious groups who themselves are also secular, that they hold their beliefs as strongly as we hold our beliefs, but that they also want separation of church and state. Because separation of church and state is the only way in real terms that you can protect everybody's rights equally. Because if we would be as opposed to the state promoting atheism as we are to the state promoting religion. So we work with the Ahmadi Muslims and also with the evangelical Christians in Ireland as three groups with very different worldviews, but who are all discriminated against in Ireland by the support that the Irish state gives to Catholicism mainly and Christianity generally. But also because we all have members of our respective belief groups in Pakistan who are afraid in many cases to speak out for themselves. We made a submission and sent a delegation just a couple of weeks ago to the United Nations Human Rights Committee when they were questioning Pakistan. And we were there as three groups from Ireland highlighting the human rights abuses in Pakistan on behalf of people who had passed information to us. And that was a very powerful message, both in terms of its content and also in terms of the symbolism at the United Nations Human Rights Committee of having three groups of very different religious views, particularly from an island where, in Ireland, which is seen as riddled with sectarian strife anyway. I think we've moved on from it, but that's certainly the image that we have. It's very important both symbolically and also practically in terms of the input that we were able to make to the committee. So I'd strongly urge people to while continuing to promote our own beliefs philosophically, to be prepared to work with religious groups who also support secularism in the context of separation of church and state.
So, I mean, I'll move from secularism as a protection for religious minorities to secularism as a protection mechanism or ensuring mechanism for women's rights and children's rights. And Annie, you have worked on that for many years now, as I understand. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that secularism is not just a right, it's a necessity if women are to be free, and children's rights and gay rights and so on. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which it's entering almost our 40th year, and I'm a co-founder when I was a college student, began because of the battle for abortion rights in the United States. And my mother was an early crusader for legalizing abortion and contraception in the state of Wisconsin. And everywhere we went, it was the Catholic nuns and priests and busting school children filling the Capitol Rotunda and speaking to the legislators about the Bible says abortion is murder. And she went from being a general activist feminist to being an ardent secularist because we realized that we would never be free until our laws were free from religious influence and our social policy. And this is just one example, but it is true throughout the whole civil rights agenda. And unfortunately, we are facing, we saw great successes in the United States, and we are at a very perilous time once again, even though we have a secular constitution. The religious right is, of course, in control of almost everything right now. More than 30 states are completely Republican dominated, both houses and gubernatorial. The Congress and, of course, the presidency, I liked Dawkins' air quotes, and we have the Supreme Court in jeopardy. And so it has never been clearer to us how important it is that we not only have a secular constitution, as the United States does. We were first among nations. It was the only original thing, really, in our US Constitution. It's godless, and its only references to religion are exclusionary, such as that there should be no religious test for public office. And the First Amendment, with its establishment clause that Congress may not respect an establishment of religion. Well, these are wonderful concepts, but they are not respected. And in fact, it can be a kiss of death for a public official to be known as an atheist in the United States. And the polls always consistently show that atheists are unelectable, that about 50% of the population would not even consider voting for president or vice president if they were known to be an atheist. And we're at the bottom of the social totem pole today with Muslims when it comes to surveys about who would you want someone to marry, who's filling our prisons. They think atheists are all criminals and prostitutes. It's ridiculous. But so it's a PR problem at this point as much as a legal problem, and I think that's probably true globally. So we have a great secular constitution, but can we keep it? And women's rights are hinging on all of this, and we are facing the defunding of Planned Parenthood, which provides most of the contraception in the United States, as well as basic health care for women, and fighting for contraception. I mean, this is ridiculous, not just abortion rights. So we are all fired up about the importance of secular government and constitution, but we have to take this to the court of public opinion and win there.
And I have been listening to you, and what sort of jumps up is this secularism serving the interest of different divergent groups, like the seculars, the atheists, the humanists, the religious minorities, women's rights groups, children's rights groups, democracy activists. And I know, Chris, I mean, you have been involved in building sort of coalitions between diverse groups, serving this ultimate goal of protecting the principle of secularism. I'd like to hear more about that from you.
Okay, thank you, Tasneem. Yes, indeed. I have in the last years, ever since I was the president of the Atheist Society at my university, been involved in various campaigns, bringing together various great activists that are also present here, obviously like Mariam, like Yasmin Rahman, like Houzan Mahmoud, like Pragna Patel, on campaigns such as freedom of expression within universities, Universities UK, the gender segregation case that we won, the Law Society case that we won again, and I'm helping generally with various campaigns concerning gender segregation now. So how do we bring together these secular movement, this inclusive secular movement? Let me start by saying something controversial, maybe controversial. And just to be clear, before I say that, I am the guy who's known, I guess, who started his activism as the guy who allegedly terribly offended religious people, allegedly, by wearing a Jesus and Mo t-shirt at his university. Freshers' Fair was then physically forced to cover up that T-shirt later on went on the BBC, The Big Questions, with the same T-shirt, again uncovered the T-shirt, and yeah, there was a bit of a debate going on there, out there, to put it that way. So I'm not the guy who's quite afraid of offending anybody's sensibilities. However, I think that it can be extremely difficult and dangerous if we effectively exclude many religious people from our movement, from our secular movement, which should be an inclusive movement, by being much more antagonistic, to put it in some way, than maybe we should be. So beliefs are for scrutiny. Religious beliefs are for scrutiny, all beliefs are for scrutiny, for ridicule, for lampooning, all of this. When we go to cross that line to thinking or saying that people are stupid because they believe in certain tenets of their faith, I think that's, first of all, wrong, it's not secular, and it's probably very unhelpful in practical terms for building those inclusive coalitions. We have to decide at some point whether we want to have more of an atheist secular movement or an actual secular movement. We know that many religious people are inherently supporting our fight. Most Catholics in this country support the right to abortion. Most Muslims are not fundamentalists. Most Hindus are not Hindutva. But yet, if we look around here, I would say, that's my guess, that most people here are not religious. There should be far more religious people here supporting our fight. And maybe part of the reason why they're not here is that some of them don't like to be put on trial for what their religious beliefs are. And I understand that, because I wouldn't be like to be put on trial and asked why I believe in such stupid things as atheism either. And I think that is something that we have to think about. So the thing is, the National Secular Society, of which I'm a council member, has made a decision some years ago. We were an explicitly atheist organization, and we have moved to become a fully secular organization, and we are still on a path to making our organization even more inclusive to religious people. And I think that is a good thing. So, well, in a nutshell, it really is this. If you want to work with people, don't put them on trial for their beliefs. Do criticize them, do scrutinize them and their beliefs, but in the end of the day, secularism is a political movement. It's not based on identity, or shouldn't be based on identity, or shouldn't be based on someone's faith or beliefs about supernatural or more questions of morality or whatever it is. It's a political movement. Let's work together in an inclusive way.
Can I add something very briefly to that? I do agree with you, but I think the inclusiveness should be in the form of alliances. I don't think that it should be at the cost of ceasing to promote atheism and reason as a better worldview.
I don't think, I'll just have to go ahead and disagree with you there, Mike, if you don't mind. I don't think a secular movement should be based on the promotion of any faith or non-faith. And that includes, by the way, this idea of, for example, we have to promote a good Islam, that's better than a bad Islam, or a better Christianity, something like that. That is something that religious people have to make up for themselves. And we should ally with them, but that is not something we should inherently promote in and of ourselves.
Yep.
As much
just very briefly, the point I was making is that you said you had moved from being an atheist movement to being a secular movement. I think you can remain an atheist movement, just as the Ahmadis remain a religion and the evangelicals remain a religion, and still work together in a secular alliance. But we're not expecting the Ahmadis or the evangelicals in Ireland to give up promoting their religion. And equally, I don't think we should give up promoting our worldview either.
Oh, okay. what I understood from Chris is that he's making a point from a very strategic point of view to begin with. Is that correct? Like,
it is a strategic point, but it's also a principal point.
Yeah, but I mean, strategic political, strategizing the political movement, if I can say so. Okay. I'll have to let's have a discussion on that. I'd like to hear from the audience as well later. I'll now turn to Houzan, and thank you for patiently waiting.
It's fine.
You have been working as a cultural worker, and you are the founder of the Culture Project, and you are using cultural work in sort of serving this goal of establishing secularism. And I'd like to hear more about that. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much, Mariam Namazi and Council of Ex-Muslims, for organizing such timely and important conference and for inviting me. And secondly, I would really like, and I feel obliged, to always pay tribute to the most courageous Kurdish women and men who are in the forefront of fighting against ISIS, the most dangerous, monstrous, sexist, masculinist, racist forces of our time, of 21st century. I was actually showing earlier on to my friend Benjamin Kurdish women who are in the neighborhoods taking up arms to actually fight against ISIS. And this is how we are defending secularism. This is how we defend human rights, women's rights, and the right for a society to exist. Secondly, I would like to say that I'm an atheist, and I don't care if that offends anybody here or outside of this place, because we are being offended time and time and all over, the world, everywhere throughout history. Women have been offended, their rights have been violated, and nobody asked them, are you offended? It's us who have been fighting for our own rights on our own, and so many times alone as well. So, and I feel like there is so much apologetic, language going on everywhere that I've been, all over the places, even at universities that is supposed to be the place for scientific research, education, intellectualism, and so on and so forth. I found so much bigotry and backwardness that was shocking, especially in somewhere like UK universities, generally speaking, whereby they just shut you up and they silence you and they call you Islamophobe, full stop, without listening to your story and where you come from and what you have been going through, by the way. For people like us to be there publicly to denounce their religion, it costs our lives, okay? But we do it because it's not a Western or Eastern thing, as other speakers before me emphasized the importance of this movement, the importance of actually being who you want to be. So that's why, for me, defending women's rights, secularism, and so on and so forth, and feminism in general, is not a single issue. It's all related. It's very important when we speak about cultural productions, be it poetry, literature, art, music, and songs, and you name it. It's important for it to exist. It only exists in secular spaces. I mean, everywhere Islamists pop up, straight away they target music, they target, art, they target scientific research. I mean, so many times they issue fatwas against scientific research. They issued fatwas for books to be burned because some poetry or some parts of the literature criticized something about God or religions and so on. That's why for us, it's very important to raise awareness about feminism and gender issues as well as secularism. We can only function within a secular discourse, and art and music and everything, and women's rights can progress within a secular society, not otherwise. I mean, I just want to comment on some things that was earlier on discussed on the panels before. Why, when it comes to the rights and freedoms of Middle Eastern women, we have to go back to religion and negotiate our rights within Islam? That's bullshit, I'm sorry. Because the example of that girl in short skirt in Saudi Arabia, it shocked and it brought down the entire Saudi Arabian kingdom, let alone going and talking about women's rights within Islamic laws of Saudi Arabia. This is impossible. You cannot actually relegate women to go on about and going to mosque with men. So what? Is that all the freedoms you want me to have, going to mosque with men or having a female imam, as if we had enough, as if we didn't have enough of male imams, of brainwashing people. Now you want to brainwash women and young girls in a Muslim, this time with a female imam. This kind of tokenism of some Middle Eastern women or Asian women arguing for an Islamic feminism or so-called women's rights within Islam, it's only a blow to the women's rights movements that is secular, that is progressive, and that is leftist and egalitarian. And that's why I cannot really support or agree with such, to argue for women's rights within such frameworks or within any religions, be it Christianity, Judaism, whatever, Islamism, you name it. And thirdly, I would like to say that so many times in the West, they think they have to support Islamism because they cannot separate between Muslims and Islamism, honestly. Even the most intellectual people I came across, these debates, whereas it's actually what we are doing is defending ordinary Muslims. It's not about that religion have no space, but it's actually us, millions of Muslims who have no space, who have no place to express themselves, to express their creativity, to basically coexist. I mean, Kurdistan is probably the only place in the Middle East that so many religions can live together. You have church, you have everything, various religions, but still that is in danger. I mean, we are still in the fight with ISIS, and as you know, I don't have to tell you what ISIS do to the Yazidi Kurdish women, and that still so many thousands of them are captured by them, selling them as sex slaves in the slave markets, raping them over and over again and treating them as slaves. This is the kind of ISIS ideology. If you don't accept it as Islam, I'm sorry, it's one of its versions. People keep on telling us, well, Islam has many versions. Well, this is probably one of them. I mean, taking the enemy's wives and daughters, it has been done all over the past 1,400 years. It's nothing new of Islamist movements and Islamist ideology and governments in the region. Stoning, killing of homosexual people, and lots of other issues that is going on. That's why we have to, wherever we are, we have to create secular spaces, be it through art, through poetry, through scientific research, through education, and through women's organizing as well. For me, there's only one form of organizing, and that has to be secular and feministic.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'd like to especially thank you for mentioning the quotes. I mean, we have had lots of discussion today about left and regressive left and progressive left and liberal left. And unfortunately, I had the feeling that by left we mean Western left. I mean, that is an error we should try to avoid, because the most leftist, secular, democratic participatory movement right now is the struggle, the fight is being fought by the Kurds in ISIS territory. And that is something we need to recognize whenever we talk about left and right and all that. Before I open for questions, I would like to just ask my panelists if you have, if you just want to very quickly comment on the discussion so far. So I'll start with Chris, if you have any comments. Yeah.
My only comment would be that I want to make sure that what I said earlier is being understood in the right way. Being an atheist is a form of resistance. In the face of religious privilege and states that are often theocratic or non-secular, being an atheist is something important that we obviously should support as a secular movement. I still do disagree with Mike that we need to promote atheism for that reason. But secularism obviously does not equate or for not promoting faith or not promoting atheism. I think the issue we need to think about, how do we make allies and how do we get a movement together that challenges fundamentalism in the broadest sense, a big society, big tent movement, and therefore we need to make some choices. That's what I think. Thank you.
Very quickly, thank you. Very quickly, Teresa, if you have any comments.
Yes, just to say that I have a strong commitment with secularism. I think that secularism is one of the most important pillars for the construction of Europe, the United Europe. We have an important migration of people that have a political and religious agenda that worry us very much, but also as the policy speaker before has said that about his country, the problems that he has. There are countries in Europe that are, the religion is awakening now, as in Poland and Hungary. I think that is a big danger for these constructions. Just to say that one of my main concerns in the Parliament is the defense of this idea of the secularist Europe.
Thank you. Annie, your quick comments.
I was going to say I thought that Charles Bradlaugh might be a little surprised at the change with the National Secular Group, but I think it's fine. I think there are different ways to get at the same problem, and it's fine to have basically a state church lobbying group. But at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we don't separate the two things, because when we say there shouldn't be religion in government, then the largely religious population says, why not? The Bible is a good book. It should be invoked in our government. I mean, you're running into this circular argument with them. And I think that when we see what has happened to outed atheist bloggers and authors in Bangladesh, we saw the movie, we know what happened to Bona and her husband, because they were atheists, that it's ever more critical that those of us who are safe to come out as non-believers, as freethinkers and atheists, must do so. Human progress and survival depends on free thought, the use of reason in forming our opinions.
Thank you. Karima.
I think we need to be incredibly conceptually clear that when we're talking about secularism, we're talking about secularism, and when we're talking about atheism, we're talking about atheism, and those two things may overlap in some places, but they are not contiguous. We have been making this point again and again when people in certain regions are accused of being atheist, when they advocate secularism, so there's a common misconception about this. I think the struggles of atheists are very important, but they are separate, and we really have to maintain the clarity. I like what you said about the different strategies you used when you're lobbying for one thing versus another. Another thing I think we urgently have to do is to reclaim the human rights space, which is not only, as the brilliant Pragna Patel said earlier, being undermined by fundamentalists, but almost even worse, it's being used by them to promote their and even justify their abuses of human rights. And we see tremendous prejudice against the concept of secularism itself in much of the international human rights movement. I think that that is something we absolutely have to come together to challenge. And I hope that in the remaining 24 hours plus that we have here, we will start talking about strategies, because at the end of the day, what's most important is not how we fight amongst ourselves here, but how we fight together when we get back out there tomorrow, which is a very lonely place.
Thank you.
And I just want to give one, very quick thing that my suggestion of one small thing people can do. I want to talk about following up from my report to the Human Rights Council and lobbying in support of the next one. And if anyone is interested in meeting me and my colleague Joanne Bouchard from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights tomorrow during the break from 11:55 to 12:30 out there to talk about it, please see us there. Thank you.
Excellent. And also, please sign up for the mailing list. I think your office puts out something like that, and you'll receive regular updates. Michael, very quickly.
Yeah, when I talk about promoting atheism and reason and why it's important, what I mean is that belief in gods is based on faith, and faith-based worldviews are less reliable for both understanding reality and understanding morality than our non-faith-based worldviews. And even if we got a secular world where in the context of separation of church and state, where the state was not giving any privilege to either religion or atheism, it would still be important from our perspective to persuade people, not by force, but to persuade people that reason and atheism are a better and more reliable worldview. So I think it is important to do both, to maintain the integrity of our worldview while also being prepared to work with integrity in alliances with religious people who also agree with separation of church and state.
Thank you. Houzan.
Well, to me, I think the most natural thing to human beings should be atheism, because when we are born, we actually have no nationality, no religion, no language, no ideology. It's all constructed and created. And I think we should not, for the sake of secularism, we should not brush atheism under the carpet because it's a bit controversial. No, I disagree with that completely. And I think we really have to keep that momentum going, and that the right to atheism is a fundamental human right, and it is important for so many people who do not organize their lives around what somebody said 2,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, whatever. So this is a very basic and fundamental human right, in my opinion. Also, I just wanted to emphasize on one important issue that so many families in the Middle East probably, or at least from my own experience, they are ordinary Muslims, but that doesn't mean they are fundamentalists. That doesn't mean they advocate Sharia law. I grew up in a Muslim family, and still some of my sisters, they wear veils. Some of my other brothers, they practice Islam, and I'm an atheist, and we all love each other, and there's no problem. You don't have to tear families apart and to take up arms against each other and kill each other because you are this or you are that. I mean, as I said, ideologies, religions, and politics, and so on and so forth, you can change them, you can adopt them, you can just basically leave them, and you don't really have to sacrifice one for the sake of another. And what has been the dominant discourse is that as if Islam is in danger of being wiped out from the planet. That's not true. It's actually, Islam is making, or Islamists are making demands everywhere in the world, and it's going ahead for them. They have mosques and religious schools and Islamic schools for children to brainwash and so on and so forth, which we have to argue for those to be closed down. And you are allowed to practice whatever religion you have, but you do not have to brainwash your child with it. You know, I'm a feminist, but I don't necessarily brainwash my child into feminism. I want her to grow up and to explore and to know. And in fact, she studied all the religions. I didn't even impose my atheism on her. I wanted her to find out by herself. I mean, every day she came home with a joke about religions, and you know, it's not my fault. When you are actually given a space to think, to be who you are, to be independent thinker, then you can decide. When you actually decide for somebody from a very early age, then it's very difficult for them to come out of it. I mean, so many youngsters in UK, they just blindly wear burqas and veils, and they're at universities.
Yes,
you know?
I mean, you do, like, you are referring to religious education also, if I understand correctly. Thank you very much. I am now going to open the floor for questions from the audience. I'll take three at a time, one from the right, from middle, and left.